Good afternoon. We are shortly going to begin this afternoon's session titled New LEA English Learner Coordinator Orientation. While we are waiting for people to join us in our virtual space, if you could do a small job for us and make sure that the audio is transmitting to you, that would be great. You merely need to raise a hand in the webinar platform or type a brief message in the question box letting us know that the audio is okay. Thank you. Great. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. This is the Wednesday, July 15th, 2020 presentation titled New LEA English Learner Coordinator Orientation. And we have for the next couple of hours a broad array of topics to get you start of school ready for the 2020-21 school year. So welcome and thank you for joining. I'm Anika Harris. Hopefully you can see me there on the screen. I am the Professional Development Specialist at OSSE, focusing on English language acquisition, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Jennifer Norton, manager.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Norton, manager for English Learner Supports, as Anika was saying, and we are both so glad to be with you here today. Appreciate the time together to get oriented to the new school year for EL coordinators. To get started, we are 2/3 of the Office of Multilingual Education English Learner Supports team at OSSE. And you see in the picture there our third team member, Santiago Sanchez, who supports dual language schools in particular. We are here to support you and look forward to working with you today and beyond. And to start to get to know each of you, we'd love to ask you to introduce yourselves by putting your name and school or LEA and role into the question box. And we're also going to use this as the attendance sheet for this session. And we'll be using this question box as one of the ways that we communicate during this session. So please give that a try now. And what is your name, school, LEA, and role? Okay. Okay, I'm starting to see. Okay, welcome, Dahlia. I have a very small little box here to look in. I can't quite see every name. I see Dahlia, Christian. Great to meet you. Let's see. Do you see other names, Anika, that I might not be able to see?
Yes, I do. We've got Yoni Eastman, Jessica at Mundo Verde. Hi, Wendy. Jordan, if we didn't already say hello to you. And it looks like some other names are coming in as we speak. Kayla is here with us from Rocket Ship. Welcome.
Great. Okay, thank you all. We are so glad that you are here today. I see we have various roles from curriculum coordinator to ESL teacher. Really excited to get to know you during the call today. Okay, so as we are all in this new virtual environment and working together, we are, doing our best to make this as interactive as possible and look forward to engaging with you. So we hope that you will participate in the chats and polls that we have coming. We will also hope to have discussion, but we just ask if you are, unless you are speaking, please keep your mic on mute. And you are welcome if you wish to put your camera on when speaking, but of course that is not necessary. And we hope you can stay engaged, speak your truth, ask questions. We are here to support and assume in positive intent as others share as well. And just we're here to be kind to each other because we are certainly all in this together. So we have framed this session as a 101 style overview. What this means is that we are going to try to make the most of our 2 hours together and focus on 3 key areas as we prepare for the start of school. English learner identification, serving English learners through programs, services, and supports, and assessing English learners. And yet, as this is an orientation, we know that we are not going to be able to get into a great level of depth on each of these topics, but we want you to have a very solid overview of English learner policies and procedures, as well as the key resources and supports that are available to you. One thing I'd like to point out is that we have uploaded a handout to this session, which I think that means that everyone can access it. And in there, you're going to see links to many of the things that we reference here. So we want you to have that as an easy takeaway, and we'll also make the PowerPoint available afterwards so that you can take what you learn, share it with others, and use it. And then also as a essentially a bit of a disclaimer here, we recognize, go to the next slide. There we go. That this is a really unique year and unique circumstance, and we are all in the midst of trying to figure out a lot of different things. And so in order for us to do that, we've decided that for this session, we're focusing on what the policies and procedures are generally. And we have designed a 4-part series that focuses on various aspects of reentry to the 2021 school year that will go into special procedures, policies, and supports that are specific to the unique environment of distance learning. So here we're focusing more generally on the procedures. Okay, and Mika, I'm going to pass back to you now. Can't hear you.
Thanks. Just like the rest of you who are in the school buildings, I myself am trying to become a little more savvy with the technology. Bear with me, and if there are some glitches, don't feel free to type into the question box or speak out. So where we are right now is just a brief exercise to get us warmed up and sort of reflect on the upcoming school year. This is a chance for you to reflect about how you feel about the upcoming school year. Things are definitely going to be different. There may be some anxieties, but there may be some areas where you're feeling grateful for the opportunity to change things up a bit or do things different. So we'll use the question box once again for you to take a moment to just write, maybe in a word, how you feel about the upcoming school year. Your word might be a word that identifies one of the three pictures here. It might be a word that identifies a different type of feeling, but see if you can sum it up shortly, and we'll take a look in the box and see what we come up with. All right, so there seem to be some patterns there in the responses. Little nerves, feeling wiped out, not quite sure what's coming up or what to expect. And I guess that is our new normal until this situation becomes normal or we revert back to where we were in early spring, late winter. So if you see there, a lot of you are having the same feelings, and that might be a little bit reassuring. But I also see a note that, you know, this is a time to be creative, exploring new technology, new opportunities, new ways of expressing oneself, engaging with families, students, and your coworkers. So there are some bright spots here. Thank you for sharing. And feel free to continue popping words into the question box if you'd like as we move ahead with the presentation. So we're here today to talk about many things, but one is an overview of the responsibility of our LEAs. There are some steps that LEAs in schools must take, and note it's worded must here because there's no option. We're not giving recommendations or suggestions or guidance, but what we are saying as far as LEA responsibilities is rooted in federal education law and policy. We've outlined some resources. These are clickable links, so when you receive these slides, which will be shared with you, as Jen said, you'll be able to click directly on the slide and look a little bit deeper into what federal and local law says about how ELs are to be included in the educational realm, particularly how English learners can participate meaningfully and equally in all educational programs. The resources include federal resources you see from the Joint Departments of Justice and Education. There are links to the Federal Elementary Secondary Education Act, which has been reauthorized as Every Student Succeeds Act, or OSSE, as well as links to the Civil Rights Act, Equal Educational Opportunities Act, and our own DC municipal regulations. The code there, E3101, specifically points you to the education of English learners and the setup and maintenance of English learner programs. We will be rooting our conversation in a document that we have put out at OSSE. The document is titled Delivering Education Services to English Learners. So it is your source for local alignment with federal policies about English learner programming and instruction. We encourage you to become very familiar with this document. Again, there's a hyperlink there in the blue box on the slide to OSSE's English Learner Policy and Program page, where you can also get a direct link to the Delivering Education Services to English Learners document. This document is broken up into 8 steps, and today we'll be covering some but not all of the steps. The steps that we don't cover, we will be sure to circle back around in future ELPOC meetings with you. So within the document, there's step 1, educational approach. We'll be looking at that a bit today and helping you think through what type of EL program will best serve English learners in your setting. What works for one LEA may not work for the next, but there are some grounding statements about what a sound educational approach is. We'll also be looking at step 2, identification. This might be the time in the school year where you are either thinking about how to identify English learners or you've done some identification of English learners already. There are uniform identification procedures for identification, and we'll cover those steps so that within the city, all of our public school and public charter schools are following the uniform procedures. Step 3 on placement and services, we'll reserve a deeper dive into that topic for future convening with you, but that is forthcoming. As are steps 4 and 5 on staffing and resources and parent engagement, we will circle back around with you in further future engagement opportunities. Today, we will go into step 6, which is the assessment of identified English learners and their participation in annual English language proficiency assessment. That goes to the next step, which is exiting once students have essentially tested out through the annual assessment of the English language program, what happens to them. So we'll get into that a bit, and we'll go into step 8, program evaluation, at another engagement, but it's a very important topic, and we hope that you do indeed join us for future engagements between OSSE and DC's ELPOCs. I'm going to pass the mouse on to Jennifer.
Thank you, Anika.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about a very useful tool very briefly. I want to make sure everyone is aware of the early access to English learner data click application. So in the, if you can do that, use the hand raise button. Have you heard of this app or used it in any way before? Just to get a sense of it. So just click the hand raise button if you have used this before. Okay, I see Jody has used it, Jordan. Okay, looks like it may be new to most people. Okay, so let me take a moment just to talk briefly about this app. This is a login-based system where you can access a preview of really, really useful student-level English learner data. So some of the data points that you can find are listed on this slide. So you can see students' current EL status, as well as their historical status, the date that they were screened, access scores, whether a student was not EL and then re-identified as English learner, and if a student was ever EL but has exited. And we also have added visualizations that show students' PARC, ELA, and math scores and their access scores. So there is a lot that is here that is extremely useful, and you know, it's what's most helpful is not only for having data about students who are current students, but those newly enrolled students who are going to have their first day of school with your school this coming year, but you may not have met yet. Those students' data will be showing in the app, so you can learn about your incoming students. I also want to make sure everyone knows, I know this is unique this year because access testing had to be interrupted and materials have been submitted back to DRC for scoring in waves. So depending on when students, schools return their access materials to the test vendor, those access scores for whether it's domain scores or the composite score, if all 4 domains were completed, they'll be available at 2 different times. So for access materials that were returned to DRC by July 2nd, access scores will be available in the Click app by August 31st. And for access materials returned to DRC by August 17th, access scores will be available in the Click app by October 15th. Anika, I'm wondering if you can advance the slide for me. Okay, thank you. Okay, so access to this app is available to data managers, of course, heads of school, principals, access coordinators, EL coordinators at the LEA and school level, counselors, and enrollment audit points of contact. And this is based on who's entered in these roles in eSchool Plus. So if you do not have a login for that, make sure that you have if you have one of these roles in eSchool Plus, you should be able to log in and access this. The link is here and it's also in the handout that I've provided.
And just check, you have control of the mouse now.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And I just saw a question, Wendy, about the dates. Yes, let me answer that. And I'll put it into the box so everyone can see the dates. They are August 31st for all materials returned by July 2nd and October 15th for materials returned by August 17th. And I'm going to put those dates into the chat box as well. Okay, so again, we are here to fill your toolbox so you can get off to a strong start. So you have the link to the policies and procedures document, which is your go-to guide that Anika told you the main sections about. And we also have a school readiness reflection tool that is very comprehensive and breaks down, excuse me, all the aspects of an English learner program with a checklist of questions. You'll see some of those sections within this presentation, and it's to show you an example of how that works, but this is a useful tool for kind of analyzing where you are with your program and areas that you might want to focus or grow. And then we have training materials on how to use the early access to EL Data app as well. We have similarly been building out our webpage with numerous resources and training materials related to everything that we're talking about today. So I encourage you to go to them as well. Okay, so now we're going to dig into English learner identification. What you see on the screen right now is the federal definition for English learner. So just take a moment to scan A, B, C, and D to see what this definition addresses. And what stands out is that there are several different parts and very carefully placed ands and ors. So A and B talks about age and type of school enrolled. And then C and D get into a lot more detail about what that means to be an English learner. And the crux of the definition is that these are students who are English learners, are speakers of another language who are not proficient in English. And this is key because schools must identify these students in order to provide access to language supports and access to the general education curriculum, and to engage parents of English learners so that students who are in the process of learning English can have access to the general education curriculum in an equitable manner. So as I said, schools are required to provide this equitable access. And, you know, there are numerous court cases that have set precedent for this. Lau versus Nichols is one of the key cases from 1974 that impacts those requirements of schools to provide access. And in this case, there were students of Chinese descent in San Francisco who were not provided language instruction to help them develop English proficiency. And the case was brought against San Francisco Unified School District. And the Supreme Court held that the school district had violated the Civil Rights Act by failing to provide special programs for students who do not speak or understand English or of limited English speaking ability, and that they therefore had failed to provide these students with equitable access, equal access to the instructional program. So in addition to being a civil right, federal education law requires LEAs to identify English learners. And the state procedure for this is outlined in a very brief overview here, and we're going to get into the details of these as we go. But in a nutshell, the state procedure is to administer the home language survey, and then based on that response, either to administer or not administer a screener for English language proficiency. And if a student is found eligible, they will receive a language assistance program to provide that equitable access to grade level content and curriculum. The home language survey is administered one time to newly enrolling students. For those who need screening, the EL identification test and parent notification must occur within 30 days of the first day of school. For students entering during the school year, so after the first 30 days, the time frame is 10 days. And this is so that students can start to receive any necessary services in a timely manner. And I will say that OSSE is going to be issuing separate guidance on this, given COVID and distance learning, to provide some flexibility here. But what you see here is the time frame that is the policy for usual times. Okay. So what is the home language survey? You know, it is a form, but I like to say it's more than just filling out a form. It is part of a student's civil right to education. It is part of understanding your students, to understand part of their language background, and it's part of welcoming students from all backgrounds. So we believe that this is a really critical step that sort of goes beyond just filling out answers to a few questions. Okay, and as we've discussed, this is required for when the student is initially enrolling in a DC school. And the form itself does state this, and we want to make sure everyone is aware that it is not used to determine immigration purposes. In fact, schools should not ask about immigration statuses. It is not used for residency status, and it is not directly what determines that a student is an English learner. It is simply the first step in the identification process. And if there's anyone here from an adult serving school, the policy is a little bit different. So schools that have, adult serving schools that have non-traditional pathways that don't lead to a high school diploma do have some flexibility. You know, you can use the OSSE Home Language Survey, or you can develop another standard survey or questionnaire that's designed by the LEA in order to determine whether a student's English proficiency should be assessed. And then similarly, there is flexibility in the type of screener to be used by that LEA. Okay, now I will preview for you the home language survey. Hopefully this link will open. Okay, great. So this is where it is posted on the page. Let me scroll down here. And I'm not sure if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. The first page goes into details about the specific procedure for administering the survey, which we'll talk a little bit about today as well, and how to process the responses. But I want to skip down to the next page so I can show you the actual survey questions that the families will see. Okay. So you can see here the introductory statement that explains the purpose of the home language survey, reiterates that it's not used for immigration purposes. And then there are 3 short but very carefully worded questions that intend to get at whether a student needs to be screened for English proficiency. So we're trying to find out what is the primary language used in the home, what is the language most often used by the student, what language or languages did the student use first. And then just for additional information to better understand language use and practices in the home, other languages spoken can be added since many students are multilingual. And if a language other than English is answered for any of these questions, that's the signal that the student should be screened for English proficiency and would then take an English language proficiency screener. And we'll, get into the screeners slightly later in this session. I will just want to show you the beginning of the rest of the document because this is obviously the English version, and we provide the form in the top 6 spoken languages in BC. So that includes Spanish, French, Amharic, Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese. And so providing that language access for students is really important to help make sure that families understand what's being asked of them and allows them the opportunity to answer the question properly. And I'm not sure if I can go back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. All right. So as we said, if the response to question 1, 2, or 3 is a language other than English, then the student should be referred to the appropriate staff member, often the EL coordinator, for English language proficiency screening. And just, I think sometimes there are misconceptions out there, but speaking another language at home or routinely using one in other settings does not necessarily mean that a student is an English learner. Okay, so we want to do a little check for understanding. And I have a question here. It says, how many languages is the survey available in? So it is in 6 languages. So Spanish, French, Amharic, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean. Okay. And let's see, I think, Anika, are you gonna be able to activate the polls? All right, awesome. Okay, so we'd like everyone to try to answer this poll. The question is a true or false. The home language survey is not used to determine if a student is eligible to take an English language proficiency screener. True or false? Okay, everybody got 100% chose false. That is correct. Great. Let's keep going. Okay, Anika, I think you might have control of the slides now.
Okay, so let's put everything in order here. And I'm on camera.
Oh, okay.
Our slides are here.
Were you able to advance it? I don't think I was able to advance it for a second.
Yeah, so while we're doing the second poll, which asks you if the home language survey can be used to determine those 3 bullet points you see at the bottom, we'll get the tech issue worked out. Poll 2 will ask you if the home language survey can be used to determine immigration status, residency status, and or if the student is an English learner.
Oh, there it is. So true or false?
And responses are coming in. Give you a couple more seconds. All right, let's see what you came up with. And the answer is false.
Oh, right. I think we lost the screen, your screen.
Mm-hmm. And you should have the power to move the slides around again. But let me know if that's not the case.
Oops, I don't think so. I'm not seeing your screen. Sorry.
Might be
There we
something.
go.
Yeah, it might be something with activating the polls, perhaps.
Okay, okay. Thanks, everybody. We're trying to go back and forth from our different locations here and having little bumps sometimes as I figure out how to use this. So, great. So thank you, Anika, and everyone for answering these polls. I think we might have just one more. Okay, so our question here, LEAs may or may not use an electronic version of the home language survey. So we do, oh, go ahead.
This isn't a poll for folks. You will actually be able to show them the correct answer, but maybe we can use the question box to see what people think, if they may or may not.
Great. Yep, we're getting a couple of answers in here. Some may, some may not. Okay, and so in fact, we do want to provide that flexibility. So yes, LEAs can use an electronic version of the home language survey. So specifically, if we know that LEAs have online enrollment forms, and it is okay to use the content to ask the questions in the enrollment form. We do expect, though, that the translations are provided in order to ensure language access. So that's the caveat, is that if it's in the electronic version, we do want those translations available so that families can understand the questions if they need one of those languages. And in addition, and this was especially for this spring, where enrollment has to be done, remotely in many cases. If the LEA wants to include the PDF in an email attachment, and receive it that way, that is okay. All right, I have one more question here. Okay, next question is, who is responsible for ensuring the collection of accurate responses by providing language support to families with limited English proficiency? Is it parent guardian, the LEA, or the EL coordinator? You can put that into your answer into the question box. Okay, we see a couple of different answers. No one for A yet, some B, some C. And let's see, the answer is, oh yeah, I see lots of answers. The answer is B. It is the responsibility of the LEA, the local education agency. Great. Okay, so before we go on, I would love to hear any questions that you might have. So anything that raises questions for you in terms of the home language survey, please feel free to put the question in the question box, or we can do hand raise, and I think we can take people off mute so we can have discussions. So please feel free to use the hand raise and we can unmute if there are any questions. All right, I am not seeing any questions right now, but feel free to add any if you need. Okay, here, thank you from Dahlia. Maybe everybody here knows, but it is important to emphasize, it is illegal for school personnel to try to determine a family's legal status, since it was mentioned in the true-false test. Exactly, it is not legal to do that. And we have some resources too. I can provide a link to a presentation that describes this in detail, and that can be helpful to share with other staff members to provide that information. Great. Okay. And if there are any other questions that come up, please feel free to put them right into the chat box. Let's keep going. The links are here in your handout for these tools. And I'm going to pass to Anika to talk about EL screening.
All right, so I'm back again to speak with you about the topic of the moment. It is the season in the school year to think about screening, or in some cases begin screening. And I will walk you through some of the more salient points about the screening topic. So after identifying who needs to be screened for English language proficiency, right? That's the information we get from the home language survey. Then we organize ourselves to screen, and the screening helps LEAs determine whether a student is eligible for placement in its EL program or not. And how it works is, if the home language survey responses indicate that a language other than English is spoken in the home, to the student, or by the student, and no information about the student appears in the EL Click app, there's no EL history that shows up in EL Click app, then what you see in the two orangey salmon colored boxes, the student must be screened for possible identification as an English learner using the appropriate screener. And the identification process must happen within 30 school days of stage 5 enrollment. We affectionately call that butt in seat enrollment. I think that's a way to help folks remember what stage 5 enrollment means. So within 30 days of the student being in school, on camera at this point in time, or with their seat occupied in the school building. Now, if the student is enrolled at some point during the school year and not necessarily at the beginning of the school year, that identification window is 2 weeks from the date of their enrollment. The question is, are you prepared to screen? It is a multi-phase endeavor. And we hinted at a tool that is found in the Delivering Education Services to English Learners document. It is also available on OSSE's English Learner policy page, and it's called the School Readiness Reflection Tool. It has several areas that help LEAs reflect on what it means to have a well-rounded English learner program. And it's a template for schools and LEAs to use to think through how they can get from no, I'm not prepared to do any of these areas to yes, I have this area covered. Area 3 is initial language assessment, also known as screening. And there are 3 topic areas here. Our school has the screener, and we have it in sufficient quantities, or we have the technology we need to do that. Our school has qualified and trained personnel to give the screener and to look at the results and understand the implications. Also, that parents and guardians know of their child's English language proficiency letter and language assistance program options. And that information comes through the parent notification letter, which should be issued to parents and guardians in a timely fashion and in a language they can understand. So speaking of identification, and the 3 areas that you see on this graphic, which is a modification of Area 3 within the School Readiness Reflection Tool, we're going to launch another poll asking, how prepared are you? Would you say, yeah, you bet, Jen and Anika, I'm prepared to do this. Let the screening begin. Or, yeah, I'm not really there yet, but I'm confident I'll get there. Or you might be, huh? Me? I need help. So these poll responses are anonymous. You can complete the poll in confidence. We won't know who you are, but this will help us to get a sense of what work we may need to do to support you, and how well our past efforts to get EL coordinators ready to screen have worked. So it looks like the majority of you fall into the I'm not there yet, but I'm confident I'm going to get there, which is about right for the middle of July. Hopefully the slides that follow in this presentation get you closer to you bet. And I see some questions popping up. I will do a pause in a bit to address some questions that are in the question box. But let's go ahead and try to get you ready. So screening looks different for different groups of students. The screening tools differ by grade and developmental level. We'll start our discussion with pre-K and kindergarten screening. And That is separate from grades 1 and through 12 because developmentally we think students who are 3 and 4 years old have developed listening and speaking skills in their home language and possibly in English as well, but may not have been instructed or have picked up reading and writing. So we do not administer screeners with a reading and writing component for the 3 and 4 year olds, nor do we do that for students who are in early kindergarten. Our statement here is that students who are in pre-K or kindergarten should only be given the screener one time unless one of the exceptions you see in the bullet points applies to them. If they're in pre-K 3, pre-K 4, or the first half of their kindergarten year, we will say to you, if they're proficient in listening and speaking, which are the domains that they receive on the screener, then the student is not identified as an English learner. The student should, however, be rescreened at the end of kindergarten on all 4 domains using an OSSE approved screener. However, if the student is in pre-K 3, pre-K 4, or the first half of kindergarten, and they're screened and identified as an English learner, then that student is, again, identified as an English learner. That student must also participate in Access, the annual English language proficiency assessment traditionally given in the spring. And if they receive a composite score of 5.0, then they fully exit EL services. Note in the parentheses, the screener cannot exit a student. Rather, the Access for ELL's annual English language proficiency assessment is the tool that we use to exit students from the EL program. As I mentioned, there are different screeners when considering which screener to choose. The primary screener for students in grades 1 through 12 is the WIDA online screener. It's aligned to the Access for ELL's assessment of English language proficiency. And with adult serving schools, those who are offering a non-traditional pathway that does not culminate in a regular high school diploma may designate its own screener. Screeners, and this comes from federal law when we're thinking about the full identification process from issuing the home language survey to screening, with both of those steps being the steps needed to determine who is actually an English learner. The screeners must be administered within 30 days of student enrollment. So if you're to meet this deadline, and we're here to support you in meeting that deadline, the steps are to order the screener materials, complete the applicable screener training. Each screener has its own training to learn how to administer the screener appropriately and understand how to interpret the screener's results. And take a look at the administration manual that comes along with that screener and other supporting text to help you get comfortable with the tool, help you in understanding what the results of the tool mean, and for tips on how to get the best results during screening with the student. So we'll do a little check for understanding on screeners just to see how much of this is sinking in. It is a lot to take in if you are new to the role, and I've been there myself, so I recognize that. The first question, or the first item here, asks how many times you can administer the screener, and as you see, you can administer the screener only one time. unless one of the exceptions in the previous slide apply. The second statement is about administering screeners to students. What results are we looking for? We're not looking for the student's name or the way they look to determine who gets the screener or what language they speak to their parents. Rather, we're using the results of OSSE's home language survey to determine who gets screened. Finally, for LEAs serving elementary and secondary school students, they must administer age-appropriate blank screeners. Is it any screener that the LEA or the school decides, or are there some limitations? Well, the parameters are just one. The parameter is that you're selecting an OSSE-approved screener, and within the Delivering Education Services to English Learners document, you can see a full list of screeners that OSSE has approved, broken down by grade band. So I'm just going to stop and take a look if there are any questions coming up that can be answered now or that might be answered a little bit later in the presentation.
Yes, Anika, I saw one question that might be good for us to answer out loud to everyone. It says, so for students in pre-K, they're only screened again if they were only proficient in two domains instead of all four.
So that's correct. As you might be able to see in the answer section of the question box, yes, you would screen again on the 4 domains if the student is proficient on the first 2, listening and speaking. So there is an exceptions policy. There is a larger exceptions document that does exist in delivering services to delivering education services to English learners. That exceptions policy is found in the appendix and does answer questions just like the one that we see here. And yes, that's a good point that you might find yourself at the beginning of the school year in remote learning mode, where we are at home, as I am, and students are at home too. We will have guidance coming out about what screening could look like and how to do that. Bear with us. We're not going to leave you hanging when it comes to how to screen, but that information is coming out. When we are in person fully, we will also have some statements about what it means to get students screened and identified. So that information is on its way to you. So that's a segue into questions about screening. There may be other questions from other attendees about the screening process or the tools that are used. I encourage you to go ahead and type into the question box. And this time, let's do something a little bit different. If you see a question about screening that has not yet been answered, and you think you might have the response to it, go ahead and type in a response. Jen and I will be moderating and we'll be looking through the question box to help facilitate that question and answer. But you know, there's a wealth of experience even if you are a new ELPOC, and we'd like to highlight that and capitalize on that. So go ahead and populate the question box with screening, since again, it is the topic of the moment at this point in the school year. And if you think you have an answer, go ahead and share with each other what you know. If there's anything we need to clarify, we can do that on our end as well. And at this point in time, it looks like the last question to come in is also timely because of the COVID situation. So if you can't see it, I'll read it out. Because of COVID, all kindergartners that were proficient on the listening and speaking, or those 2 domains in fall 2019, should be rescreened in the fall domains this fall, in the 4 domains this fall. Yes, if possible, we encourage you to go ahead and rescreen in 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing, again, if it's possible. So we'll move ahead with a little bit more about gathering information about English language proficiency at the beginning of the school year. And that concerns what happens when a student enrolls and they're coming from out of state. What do you do with out of state access scores? Students who come from another state and have an access for ELL's assessment score from a different WIDA state do not need to be rescreened. And that statement applies for students who are presenting a score from within the last 4 school years. So access for ELLs is a WIDA product, and it transfers from WIDA state to WIDA state. DC is a member of the WIDA consortium. We're considered a WIDA state, just like Maryland and some of our neighboring states, but other states that are not neighboring to us. And those scores would be valid if they are presented and are stamped within the last 4 school years, meaning that student would not need to be screened. If the scores are available, hopefully they would be presented by the transferring student during enrollment. You would want to see that the score was attained within the same timeline as would be required for the screener to be administered. So to capture all of that again, we see in the grayish boxes, if the score, that out-of-state WIDA score, indicates that the student scored less than a 5.0 on access, and the score was within the last 4 years, the student wouldn't need to be screened again. The student would be classified as an English learner, and you would deliver services accordingly. If that out-of-state access score indicates the student scored higher than a 5.0 on access, you can work with other administrators who are familiar with OST tickets, like data managers frequently are, or other enrollment personnel. Your school or LEA can submit what's called an OST or OSSE support tool ticket. And in that ticket, detail that the student had a score report from out of state. They scored 5.0 or higher, and that you would like to have the student classified as an EL monitored student. So that's the procedure there. A little bit more about transfer students, and this applies whether you are receiving a transfer student at your school or if you are at an LEA. So a student who is identified in the EL Click app, or listed here as the Early Access to EL Data Application Click app. That student does not need to be rescreened. So this is a transfer student. They've got some EL history in the EL Click app, but they're coming to you for the first time at your school or LEA. That student does not need to be rescreened. If there is no EL information present in the Click app for a transfer student, and the student now has been screened, maybe you see there's screener status of proficient in the app, but you're not quite seeing that they're an English learner in the Click app. Trust that that screener data that you see is valid and do not rescreen the student. So there are reasons why a student might have some history like a screener score, but they're not an English learner in the Click app. Go ahead and trust the screener score that you see and do not rescreen the student. As you can expect, there are some exceptions, like when the LEA believes that the child might actually be an English learner based on how they're performing in classes, on tests, maybe teachers' notes and observations from parents or guardians, then that might be a reason to screen. If the student is incoming and in pre-K or kindergarten, they may need to be rescreened in the spring of their kindergarten year or spring of their first grade year when they are eligible to take a screener on all 4 domains of the screener. So this is a lot to take in. You will be receiving the slides. The statements that are here are also in delivering services, education services to English learners in that document, and the exceptions policy is printed in the appendix of delivering education services. After screening, there is a step called parent notification. It's quite important to let parents know that their child is eligible for placement in the EL program, and there is a timeline that that notification needs to be issued. So the requirement is that LEAs are notifying parents or guardians via letter of the screening results within 30 days of identification at the start of the school year, and for a student who started later in the school year, that window is within 2 weeks of their enrollment. There are some requirements as to what that parent notification letter includes. Oh, move too fast. There are reasons written here. They come out of the Every Student Succeeds Act, pertaining to parent notification requirements. These bullet points are not optional. On OSSE's EL pages, we have provided a sample for you that you can then customize for the needs of your school or LEA. It's a sample parent notification letter. If you need to use that to get you started, it is there as a resource for you. Parents also have the right to say, you know what, I understand my child is eligible for placement in the EL program, but I want to waive my child's placement in the EL program. They have the right to do that. The duration of that waiver is 1 school year. Parents may waive services and then decide that they want to re-enter their child in the school's EL program during the year, and that's also the parent's right. So parental waivers and re-entry, should one of those scenarios occur, should be documented in writing and kept in the student's file. There are some sample documents that we have linked to from the Department of Education to support you in parent notification and what waivers might look like, so you can get some samples there. Let's just be clear about what the waiver means. If a parent waives a child's right to be in the EL program, the student is still an English learner, and the LEA or your school must still administer access for ELLs to students in kindergarten through grade 12. The LEA receives EL funding for the student, and the students included in the LEA's EL accountability reporting. But a parent waiving their child's right to EL program placement does not exit a student from EL status. That is sometimes a misconception. And it does not make a student exempt from taking access for ELLs. So when a parent presents a waiver to you or expresses concerns maybe about placement in the EL program, it's very important to be clear with the family what the parental waiver means and what it does not. Other tools to help you through this process are our training webinar on screening and placement. Again, our sample parent notification template that you can customize for your environment. And when it comes to assessments, we have a point of contact. His name is Michael Craig. You'll probably become very familiar with him this school year. He's OSSE's assessment point of contact for special populations, special education, and English learners. In your handout, which is attached here to the webinar platform, you'll see that this checklist is one of the pages. And if you were able to check the boxes, you'll know that you are start of school ready. The topics in the checklist pertain to what we have covered thus far in our presentation. So you can refer back to your handout, and as you gear up for that date in August or September, see how many marks you can tick here on the list. We'll now take some questions about the identification process. I'm sure some have come in.
Hi, Anika, there are some great questions coming in.
Right. So I see a question about parent refusal. A parent should understand the purpose of the assessment. And I'm not sure if the question is about screening or the access for ELLs assessment that happens every spring. It's very important, again, to let parents know what the purpose of the assessment is, what the assessment tells you and what it does not tell you, and what happens to the student after the assessment. You know, certain scores indicate that students need more support, and certain scores indicate that they do not need support. Rather, they can go into monitoring status, but not actively receive EL supports. After having that conversation, some parents may say, okay, you know, my kid should or can take the assessment. And, you know, once in a while, a parent will say, I still don't want my child to be tested. We encourage you to, if at all possible, you know, reach out to the parent and try to maybe address concerns, but you certainly cannot force a student to sit for the administration of the assessment. Oh, several questions came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, in the interest of time, if we didn't get to your particular question during the remaining time, we will on the back end be able to see the questions that came in and either respond to you individually through email or perhaps come up with a question and answer document that we can send to the whole group. There is no guidance on how refusals are documented, other than you should document them. So OSSE is not going to prescribe what that looks like. You might get ideas from the U.S. Department of Education toolkit that was linked in one of the previous slides. But how that gets documented is going to be up to you at the school or LEA level.
Yeah, and I'd love to add too that we have provided sample parent notification templates that LEAs can adapt because, as Anika showed, there are so many specific requirements for the letter. We've sort of crafted those sections and then show where an LEA needs to customize. And in that letter, it does ask for parents not just to sort of document that they have received this. So it's not just documenting the refusal. And I think that's, the spirit of this is to make sure that families, understand that their child is eligible for English learner services. And, I would say as a best practice would be not just to, put the letter in the backpack or virtual backpack and send it off, but to also have the conversation so that parents truly understand what this means.
Okay, more questions about the parent notification letter or parent notice, but this time notice that their child will be screened or administer the access in the spring. And I think that's an excellent question. There is no requirement from our part at the state or at the federal level, but I guess we can say it's best practice or a great idea to let parents know that their child will be tested or screened. As an idea, back in the day when I was school-based, I would hold a week-long office hours. So I would have a table at the drop-off and pickup area of the school with something behind me, I think, that said, ask me about access. And, at that point, I'd gotten to know which parents belonged to which kids and would sort of reach out to them as well, letting them know, let's talk about access, what it is, why your student is going to be tested, and what the outcomes could mean, what the implications are for your child. And I think parents really appreciated that. But there is no requirement that they are notified. Just a nice thing to do, and I think would be appreciated by parents.
There's a question, Anika, I don't think we've answered it yet, about if a parent requests screening for their child after the initial 30 days. And, I haven't typed it out yet, but I was thinking for that response that, it would be good to kind of bring out the home language survey and discuss with the parent why they would want their child screened, and if their responses, suggest that would be helpful. But if a parent, had initially, not provided home language information or had initially refused screening, but then they decide that they do need it, I think that screening should occur, and that definitely the conversation about it should happen.
Thank you. And I also see interest in clarifying the identification timeline. So we've talked about 30 days, we've talked about 2 weeks. The entire identification process, that's the screening and the parent notification letter, happen within 30 days of enrollment. So I think I used a very choice word at the beginning of the screening section, that screening is an endeavor, particularly if you have more students that need to be screened, because there are all of these bits and pieces that do need to be taken care of, and there are requirements and hard stops as to when things need to be completed. So yes, the parent notification letter that your child has been screened, these are the results, and the other 8 bullet points that we sort of breezed through on one of the previous slides. That letter does need to be issued within 30 days of enrollment. And if the student is enrolling later in the school year, then that timeline would be 2 weeks. Okay. With your permission, I'm going to move ahead. Let's see if I can do some fancy finger work here. And pass the control on to you, Jen.
Okay. dokie. Okay, thank you.
It is fancy work indeed. Okay, let's see.
Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, there we go. Thank you all for the questions. Definitely keep them coming. We are happy to answer questions. So definitely welcome that. So we're going to move to, once the identification process for new students has passed, and you know that students need EL services, and of course you may have students who you already had identified as English learners and started off the school year already in that status, so they would start receiving services immediately. Once instruction begins, there are certain requirements for what it means to provide English learner instruction, or sometimes this is called in federal documents a language assistance program. We call it an English learner or EL program. There is quite a bit of flexibility provided in determining what EL instruction looks like, how that model works, but there are some basic requirements set out in civil rights law. So one is that the program must be based on sound educational theory. 2, the programs and practices, and that means that kind of the implementation, including resources and staffing, must be reasonably calculated, that the implementation of that program based on that theory would effectively produce results. And then 3rd, that the program actually is succeeding in producing results. So base this on sound theory, provide the resources so that when you implemented it actually will work, and then review the program so that it does work. And if there is something that appears to not be working, that should be adjusted. So this snippet from the Federal Department of Education toolkit just goes into a little bit more detail about what the program should look like. So students need to reach proficiency within a reasonable amount of time. So this is an indicator of the effectiveness of your program, essentially. And what is a reasonable amount of time to reach proficiency is determined by states. For DC, the target is up to 5 years to proficiency. And this is in line with research that shows that students acquire proficiency within 5 to 7 years. So schools need to provide those programs until supports are no longer needed. And in DC, this is measured by students meeting the EL exit criteria of scoring a 5.0 on the access test. The last bullet here is important to point out because some students who are English learners also have an IEP, and schools must provide both language support services and services per the student's IEP. Okay, so here we see a list of the 5 program models that are commonly used in DC. Each of these is considered effective by experts in the field. And I'm going to launch a poll here that asks, which EL program model does your school or LEA use? And you can actually select more than one answer here, because I know that some schools may have, or LEAs may have more than one program, maybe for a different campus, different campuses, or even strand programs within a school for various reasons, often designed based on student population and students' needs. Okay, so we're seeing votes come in. If you haven't voted, please go ahead and do so. Give you one more minute here. And then let's close the poll. All right, and let's see the results. Okay, so we have a pretty Oh, a great range here. So we have at least one dual language represented, maybe more. We have inclusion and collaborative teaching, some content-based ESL, newcomer programs, and sheltered content programs. Great, 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 great to just learn a little bit about your programs. And we'll talk a little bit in the slides that follow, just to talk a little bit more about these different models. But regardless of the model that you choose, the critical factors that cut across all of those models is that you want to be providing that specialized language instruction that recognizes English learners' unique needs as second language learners, regardless of it's a content-focused instruction or language-focused. You want to have a specific focus on all 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. You want to focus on both oral and literacy development. And you want to make sure that your programs are staffed with teachers who are prepared to understand English learners' unique needs, you know, as individuals, as language learners, as parts of the school. And you want to make sure that those teachers are ready to use specific instructional techniques that are useful when students are learning English. And even better, if those teachers can also collaborate with other teachers who are teachers of those students throughout the day or week. And ultimately, you know, this goes for all students, including English learners, to create a school culture that is accepting and respectful of students. I will put a plug for our summer series, which is, there's 4 separate sessions, and our 3rd part is going to focus on describing and defining English learner program models. And we're planning to have this whether or not distance learning was happening. So this now will be twofold in defining that for in-person as well as remote or hybrid settings, so that we can kind of problem solve on how to identify what the key features are of implementing various program models, and then what does it look like to implement it in these different settings. And so certainly there are different considerations when you are thinking about each of these models. So dual language is growing. We have, I think, over 20 schools that provide dual language education in DC. And as we saw in the poll, that co-teaching or inclusion is a growing practice. And you know, the spirit of collaboration across educators, I think, is key for successful EL instruction, whether or not you're doing full co-teaching models or simply a lot of collaborative practices. Finally, content-based ESL, I know, is very common, and that can take different forms. So we know that there may be a dedicated ESL class. There may be pull-out class that is ESL focused, but content-based, and that, you know, this can take different forms. So we recognize that. Similarly, there are several newcomer programs here in DC, and this is typically students who are newcomers at an older age, in middle or high school, and are participating in a program that is really designed not only for acquiring English, but acculturating to the American culture, school system, and again, this also can take different forms in terms of how long a student may participate in that. And then for sheltered content, I'll also put a plug. We know that a model called SIOP, Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, and other similar versions of that are commonly used in DC, and we are planning a professional development series for this school year that will delve into the different aspects of what is sheltered content instruction. So I'll just put a plug for that for this school year. And then I had already mentioned this briefly on a previous slide, but do want to point out that some details about students who are dually identified. And you know, we know that this also requires collaboration. So just want to kind of put that out there, that students who are English learners who also have IEPs need to have those language development goals addressed so that the various, you know, specialized instruction, specialized needs that the student has are addressed in the IEP and then in instruction. For students who are English learners who have significant cognitive disabilities, those students may be eligible to take the alternate access test as their annual English language proficiency test and not take access. And so that is, you know, for a very small number of students, but is available in the cases where that's appropriate. And finally, just some more notes on serving dually identified students. I guess we're just kind of trying to reiterate the same point over and over because that collaboration and those dual needs are so important. And you know, we just wouldn't want students to kind of not receive needed services that they could benefit from. Okay, so I think we have one last poll on related to this. But before we do that, just want to share with everyone this section about EL programming from the School Readiness Reflection Tool. So there's 3 points here, and think to yourself as you look at these, where you feel like you are and your school is in terms of your school's program. So does your school implement an educationally sound instructional model? Yes, in progress, or no? Does the school use sufficient financial and programmatic resources to effectively implement that program? Yes, in progress, or not at all? And then does the program include instruction aligned to WIDA and grade level content standards? So just reflect on that. I feel like we're always a work in progress and looking to improve programs. So that may be where you are. And I would like to also launch one last poll that will ask some more questions, which we haven't gotten into the details of today, but just interested to hear where you are with this. How prepared do you feel to support staff with developing instruction aligned to WIDA and grade level content standards? So what's WIDA? I'm not prepared at all. Or I know something about this, but I'm not prepared. I'm a little prepared, but I could still use help. Or I'm prepared. I'm a pro at this. We'd love to know where you are, and this will also help us as we refine our supports for you. I'm seeing, oh great, it's great to see answers coming in. And again, it's anonymous, so we won't know who's answering. And all right, so it looks like about half are feeling a little prepared. Some people are feeling super prepared, and I know also on the other end of I know a little something, but not feeling super prepared. So fortunately, it's only July, and we do have a little bit of time and 4 sessions designed to support you on this, and then we are also available, you know, throughout the school year as well to help you to grow and feel prepared. So we look forward to working with you on that journey. And if there are specific questions that you have or specific supports that you need, I welcome you to add those to the questions. the question box. So no question too small. Feel free to put a question in the box if there's something that you'd like to discuss or something you'd like us to support on in the future related to developing and implementing a program model at your school or LEA. Right. So I'll keep going. I didn't see any questions come in yet. We do have additional information. We have a training webinar on EL program models. We also have one-pagers on the different program models. It's helpful for comparing and contrasting if you're considering what's right for your students in your school. And then we are available to support, and I do want to point out that Santiago Sanchez's focus at OSSE is supporting dual language programs in particular. So if you don't know him yet, he is a great contact, and you can feel free to get in touch with him. So thinking ahead to the school year, how to get off on a great start in terms of your program model and instruction. Think about those next steps. So if you feel a little fuzzy on like what is your EL program model, or with how much fidelity is it really getting implemented, it's a good time to start that conversation of what is this going to look like. This could be a reflection based on the past school year, and as of course looking forward to the coming school year and recognizing that there will be distance learning happening. There are resources available, some of which we have provided here and have on our webpage. We suggest looking for more materials to support your specific model. And we bring up co-planning a lot. We are always eager to see educators working and seeing students who are English learners as our students, everyone's students. It's not the student of the EL teacher only. Students are interacting with lots of teachers throughout the day and week, and that co-planning and having it be scheduled and purposeful is so critical to the success of students. So we encourage that. And this is a great time to be looking at what kind of professional development do your staff need? What kind of coaching is needed to help all teachers be prepared to provide language supports for students? General education teachers appreciate being able to have strategies so that they can provide access to the content to students at all proficiency levels within the general education classroom. And this is a great time to see where your own gaps are and seek out those learning opportunities and really build up and prepare for the year. Similarly, in the EL Click app, I'd like to just point out again that you can identify which students are dually identified. There is a column in the spreadsheet for that. So you can find out which students are dually identified, and then we recommend collaborating with special education staff to examine what those disability categories are, understand their IEP goals, and how you can bring that together effectively with language development goals. Okay, so I don't see any questions. Oh, let's see. Okay. Okay, I've got a question. What is the typical number of EL coordinators in a pre-K through 8th grade school? That is a great question. I also welcome others, like if you want to chime in on your own school and what your experience is, we absolutely welcome that. And I think that this is something where there's no one answer because student schools vary so greatly. In DC, we have a lot of schools that have 10 or fewer English learner students, and a lot of schools that have a really high number of students who are English learners. So it can really depend. If anyone would like to go ahead and take themselves off mute to share the situation at their school, we welcome it. Okay, right. If anyone wants to drop anything in the chat as well. But Howard, I would say that, you know, I've seen many different things. Sometimes there is an EL coordinator who is not necessarily providing instruction and is serving more of a coordinator of access, of setting English learner goals for the whole school, and is essentially overseeing an EL program. And there may be EL teachers who are collaborating with general education teachers at each grade level, and the EL coordinator may oversee that. Some schools may have an EL coordinator who is teaching students and also coordinating other aspects of EL programming. And it really depends on the school size, the student population size, how many English learners, what grades, so many factors. So I think that is definitely case by case. And I hope that answer helps, even though I know it is not a cut and dry answer. Oh, and we have a question. Oh yeah, I think Anika already answered this. Yes, we'd be happy to put a Q&A together. That's a great idea. Okay, so let me pass it off to Anika to talk about EL assessment.
Hello again, everyone, and we're going to round out the presentation with talk about access for ELLs. The Access for ELLs 2.0 assessment is a topic because it will consume you in your role for the better part of the school year. You know, it's not just during administration time when you'll be actively involved with access, but there's a lot of preparation, gearing up, training, and then breaking down, so to speak, after the administration window. So let's just talk a little bit about what access is and what the implications are for you. Access is one of DC's statewide assessments. It's a large-scale assessment, and it's given to students in grades K through 12 who are English learners. So just to talk about some confusion that has arisen in the past, if a student is not identified as an English learner, they should not be administered access for ELLs. And I think of it this way. Look at the name of the assessment. It's access for English language learners. So if a student has not been identified as an English learner, they should not be taking the test. And that's just a way I keep in my head who gets it and who does not get the test. This test falls under, well, it's a secure test, and it falls under the requirements of the Testing Integrity Act. Accordingly, you see some bullet points here on the slide. It's given every year, traditionally in the spring. It's used to monitor how students are progressing in their English language development. The assessment helps to measure if students are prepared to exit the EL program and do in their classes without the supports that come along with being an English learner in an EL program. For educators' purposes, the assessment provides scores and a breakdown of how students are performing in the 4 language domains. You can use that to enhance instruction, have conversation with parents about what they can do to support their students or what the EL program offers and what they would like to see their child getting out of the EL program. It also helps with planning, not just with others in the EL team at your school or LEA, but also with administrators and with content teachers, special education teachers, and related service providers. The exit criteria on access is 5.0. So we've seen a little bit in earlier sections about this 5.0 score. The 5.0 is an indication to us in DC that a student is no longer requires active participation in an EL program, no longer requires the bevy of services and supports that come with the program, but they have reached a level of English language proficiency that allows them to function independently in their courses. So exiting, that term exiting, means a student has reached 5.0 or higher on the access. Once a student has reached a 5.0, their status goes from being an EL to EL monitored. Pardon me, we sometimes use the term ELM for students who are EL monitored, and they are monitored for a period of time by you as an EL POC, by teachers, or by a monitoring team to determine if further supports are needed or not. That monitoring window in DC is 4 years. Make no mistake, however, that exiting does not take place if a parent or a guardian decides to exercise their right to waive their child's right to be in an EL program. So if a parent refuses EL services, the student is still actually an English learner and can be placed back in the EL program as an active EL student getting services if the parent changes their mind again. But exiting, again, does not allow parents or guardians to pull a student from the status or the categorization of EL. So in many forms, many times, many ways in the past couple of hours, we have talked about our policy around exiting students. And most recently, we talked about reclassifying ELs as monitored ELs or ELMs. Do you know, and you can use the question box to answer the next 3 questions, but we'll start with number 1. Do you know what happens to an English learner when their parent waives their child's access to the EL program? So parent comes up to you or submits a document in writing, yeah, I don't want my child to be in this program. What happens to the student? And I see some responses coming in, and the response that, okay, so they're not in the EL program, but they are still ELs is correct, along with the continuation of that statement that the student will still take access for ELLs until reaching a 5.0 or higher on access. Next question. Not next slide, but next question rather. What is the criteria to exit the EL program? It's a number. And I see some people typing the number in. That number is 5.0. We could also say 5.0 or higher. In question 3, how many years does a student remain in EL monitored or ELM status, where they have a team at their school or LEA who is checking in periodically to make sure that they're still able to access the curriculum independently, or if additional supports are needed? Yes, the number of years is 4. So students are monitored for 4 years after exiting with a 5.0 on access for ELLs. So some more tools related to access and testing in general. OSSE has an access for ELLs page on its website, so you can visit that. There are usually timelines for when EL POCs, or more specifically, testing coordinators for access need to do gearing up and some of that breaking down after administration. If you're interested to know when the new school year's testing window is for access, you can also find it on OSSE's Access for ELLs page. If you're interested in learning about testing accommodations for English learners, OSSE has a testing accommodations webpage, and this came up in the section today on students who are duly identified. OSSE has put out a testing accommodations guide. Part 1 is for students with disabilities and Part 2 is for English learners. We've also put together a webinar training interested parties on testing accommodations for English learners. It's a co-production with Michael Craig, OSSE's assessment specialist, and myself, so that you understand a little bit more about what EL testing accommodations are and are not. So we invite you to use those resources to inform your school year. Now we'll go into a little problem solving. Read the text on this slide carefully. You know that students who exit the EL program are monitored for 4 years. Now think about this. Pre-K3 and Pre-K4 students who receive a proficiency score on their screener may also be monitored, so to speak, until they're eligible to take a 4-domain screener in the second half of their kindergarten year or beginning of first grade, say. Given what is written on the slide, what might EL monitoring look like at your location? Can you think of some monitoring procedures that can help monitoring work effectively where you are? We encourage you to type into the question box to share what has happened with monitoring at your site if you've been there for a while, or what you've experienced if you're not a brand new coordinator. Maybe you've done monitoring in another state or another LEA. You can also type in the question box, I still have questions about this, but I think we might do ... and you can fill in the blank there. Your typed responses in the question box could in fact help someone else who might be sort of scratching their head in thinking through what monitoring will look like at their site. And the issue of monitoring can seem like a big topic. We at OSSE will be coming back together with you to discuss monitoring and what it could look like. So you'll get some guidance from us. Again, that's not going to be a topic that we leave dangling for you. And for the sake of students and helping them achieve their academic and English language proficiency goals, we don't want to just leave that topic unresolved for you. So we will come back to that. As you think through, what else do I need to get start of school ready in the weeks remaining? We will leave you with some additional tools that you can access. We have OSSE's English Learners Policies and Procedures document, also known as Delivering Education Services to English Learners. Within it, you can find number 2, the School Readiness Reflection Tool, and you've seen a couple versions of the focus areas in this presentation today. It's actually a much broader planning document and reflection document. We encourage you to use it. You know, even if you think you've got EL programming under your belt, you may indeed find there are areas where you could need work, and you can use the tool to map out who will partner with you to get from we're not quite there yet to yes, we've got this, and in what span of time will you need to accomplish your goals. The EL Click app is number 3. This is a data application that allows you to see EL history, to know who may or who is an English learner in your building. Do they have disabilities that you need to be aware of? And much more information. So it's a data visualization tool. You can sort of customize the visualizations that work for you to help you understand the numbers behind the students in your school building. And with number 4, we wanted to leave you with some information about language access. The language access information portal doesn't come from OSSE. However, it's coming from DC's Office of Human Rights. And there you will find tools to help you think through how you might want to support families who are not proficient in English and need either interpreting or translation of documents. So your school or your LEA can use the portal to get ideas about how to support families and in what areas they would need support this coming school year. The resources above and many more resources are available on OSSE's English Learner Policies page, and the link is there. We also have an English Learner Instructional Resources page with, again, many resources. If you're into listening rather than reading, there are a number of archived recordings that have been broadcast over the years that you can just click the title that interests you and check it out. We also encourage you to take a look at the Dear Colleague letter that was released by the Department of Education and Department of Justice. There are provisions for you at the LEA level coming from these federal agencies about how English learner programs should support English learners in all phases of their EL programming, including working with students with disabilities who are English learners and engaging the families of English learners. So next steps, we really do look forward to seeing you virtually in the next 4 sessions, re-entry to the 2021 school year. For English learners, we have a 4-part series, and part 1 is next Tuesday, July 21st. If you haven't already, register for 1, or hopefully you'll register for all 4. And we will also share with you the landscape of English learners in DC and the vision for success that we've outlined here at OSSE. We will share that on Thursday, September 17th, and I believe you can register for all of those sessions right now at the link that you see on this slide. You can also find out about the wealth of supports that we offer at OSSE's Division of Teaching and Learning. Within our division, we have other content area specialists who are currently recruiting for and delivering PD as we speak. So if you subscribe, you will get real-time updates, monthly, I should say, about what our offerings are, and you'll find out how to register. We are here to support you. We would love to hear from you. Just need to send us an email and we'll respond. There's Jennifer Norton. I'm Anika Harris, and again, our partner in dual language programs is Santiago Sanchez, so our email addresses are there. We hope to connect with you, and please don't be strangers. Jen, do you have any parting words before we conclude this session?
Nothing. You said it all so nicely, and I just would appreciate everyone's time, and I'm happy to stay on the line a little bit if anyone has any additional questions that they want to ask afterwards.
And I'll type this here. Yes, our email domain is dc.gov. We are not a part of DCPS, so we use firstname.lastname@dc.gov for the most part, and you should be able to see our email addresses on this slide here. So I too will stay on for a moment more, but we want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again on Tuesday, July 21st for part 1 of our summer series. Have a great rest of the week and stay cool. Just winding it down, but minding the question box just in case. Anything else?
Looks like no more questions.
All right, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. I also hear my kids being kind of rambunctious downstairs. I'll be back online.
Okay, we can debrief tomorrow. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone. See you hopefully on Tuesday, July 21st.
Bye, everyone.